This is Will Isbell with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service and Harris County Master Gardeners. We're in partnership with Herman Park Conservancy as we present a program today for their Garden in Nature series. So up till now, your Garden in Nature series has primarily been outside activities. But one of the important things to remember is our connection to nature, our connection to the outdoors doesn't stop when we come into our home. You know, in my house, I'm surrounded by houseplants, I'm surrounded by views of the outdoors, and I'm also surrounded by produce from my garden. So what we thought we would do is take some of the produce and herbs that we've been growing in the late spring and early summer that we're harvesting out of the gardens, and we would put together a menu for a little dinner party for 6 so that you can follow along at home, have a few friends over, and enjoy a lovely evening. So to start our dinner off, we're going to make a cocktail. So we're going to be making a Mexican mint marigold gin fizz, and we're going to be using Mexican mint marigold, which if you're not familiar with it, is a fantastic herb that grows very well here in Houston. We usually grow it in place of French tarragon, which it's too warm to grow here. And it has a very similar scent and flavor profile. It has a little bit more anise in it than a standard tarragon, but a really nice bouquet when you crush it and smell it. Super strong, super potent, and I'm a big fan. So that's what we're going to be using. So we're going to be breaking off about 5 to 10 sprigs, and this is just going to be to taste, right? If you want it a little more herbal, then go for a little more. If you like it less herbal, of course, use a little less. Do one more. So we're going to take this. Even though we're going to muddle it, I'm just going to give it a quick crush in my hand just to release some of those oils. It's going to go into our pitcher. We're going to also put 2 heaping tablespoons of sugar. I'm using a raw sugar because I like the flavor profile more than just a white sugar. It's going to give it a little bit more depth with that molassesy flavor. And then we're going to take 2 lemons. And we're just going to thinly slice 2 lemons. And then we'll put them in there, and then we're going to muddle them together. And if you don't have a muddler, you can use a dowel, works great. You can use the back of a spoon, of a long-handled spoon. Do make sure, since we'll be muddling the outside of your lemon, do make sure to wash your lemons very well, thoroughly first, just to get them nice and clean. So we're going to toss those in. Take my muddler, and you're pressing into the sugar because the sugar is going to become your abrasive. So we're just going to give it a stir, just making sure we're crushing up the herbs. Okay, so we have our herbs, our lemon, sugar in there. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take 3/4 of a cup of gin. For this, I'm going to be using Citadel gin, but any gin that has a lot of botanics in it would be great to use. We're also going to be using 3/4 cup of an elderflower liqueur. Now we're going to add 1/3 of a cup to 1/4 of a cup, just depending on your taste, of fresh squeezed lemon juice. And then 12 ounces of club soda or something sparkling. I'm going to be using Topo Chico. Give this a swish around. In fact, I'm going to stir with my muddler just to make sure that the sugar is fully dissolved on the bottom. Now we can get our glasses and pour it up. So we're just making 2 right now, one for me and one for the cameraman. And we're going to pour them out through a little strainer into a chilled glass of ice. And just garnishing with a little bit of the Mexican mint marigold and a lemon slice. And cheers. So again, Mexican Mint Marigold Gin Fizz. So for our appetizer course, we're going to be making stuffed figs with prosciutto. So we're going to be taking dried figs. These happen to be Turkish figs, but you can use dried Greek figs. Kind of just pick your favorite fig. It helps if they're a little loose in the center, so that you can kind of feel they have a little bit of a cavity. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut the top off just slightly. We're going to hollow that out. We'll take some feta cheese. And then the fun part is you're just going to stuff that straight down in and push it in and try and close the fig up a little around it. So you have that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to be taking some sage that we have growing in the garden, and this is just a standard culinary sage. We'll take a single leaf. I like to place it over the opening to help kind of seal it. And then we're just going to take a little bit of prosciutto. We're going to wrap with the prosciutto, and if the prosciutto breaks slightly, just overlap it and smash it back down. It'll seal up once you're searing it in the pan. And we're just going to wrap that over. And then we will put a toothpick through this to hold it, and we'll go to the pan. I'm going to finish prepping these. All right, so we have a shimmer on some olive oil, and we're just going to press our figs in. We're just going to do a little pan fry just to crisp up the prosciutto. And there are kind of 4 little sides that you're going to want to get crisp. And for a dinner party, I normally like maybe 2 or 3 of these per person. We'll just put them out there to drain off a little bit. So here we have our little feta stuffed fig with prosciutto and fried sage on it. All right, now that we have our drink and our appetizer out of the way, we're going to focus on our entree. Because we have an abundance of eggplant and basil and tomatoes in the garden right now, we're going to work to make an eggplant lasagna. So we're going to start with the filling. We're taking 1 egg. We're going to lightly beat that egg just to incorporate the white and the yellow. And we will be adding in 15 ounces of ricotta. Now, I'm using a part skim ricotta, but if you want to be a little bit more indulgent, of course, go for the full fat. There's definitely more flavor in that. And then we have 1 cup of Parmesan, and we have 2 cups of mozzarella. Again, I'm using a part skim mozzarella, but you can use a full fat. We're going to take about a 1/2 cup of the mozzarella out and about a 1/4 cup of the Parmesan out and reserve those. So we'll take the cheeses, mix them in, and that is essentially going to be our filling. You just want to blend it till it's a nice smooth consistency and then set it aside. So now we're going to work on the eggplant. We're just going to take 2 large eggplants. These are between kind of a medium and large, so we may use a 1/3. We're just going to take the ends off. And then we're going to cut into 1/8" slices. Nice and thin. About that is what you want. So now that we have our eggplant sliced, we're just going to lay them out. And I find if you flip them back and forth, you'll get more eggplant on the sheet pan. We're going to put them down on the sheet pan. Take just a little bit of kosher salt. I like to use kosher salt here because it's not as strong as like a table salt. And just sprinkle it. And then we're going to flip these and do the opposite side. And what we're doing is, if you've ever made coleslaw, we are salting because the salt is going to pull some of the excess moisture out of the eggplant. And it'll help keep your eggplant from being watery once you start cooking it. So a little on that side. We'll set this sheet pan aside and prep the rest of the eggplants. Let them sit about 10 minutes and then we'll come back. All right, so it's been 10 minutes. We're looking back at the eggplant, and I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but it's very glistening because the moisture is starting to pull out. And so what we're gonna do is just take some paper towels. We're just gonna press them down and just absorb some of that moisture. We'll flip these and kind of keep it wiped as we flip them. Pat this side dry. And we'll finish all of the eggplant patting them dry. All right, so we have the eggplant patted down. That's taking care of the excess moisture. Now, there are two ways you can do this next step. You can either have a grill pan or a pan and do a quick, in a hot pan, do a quick sear on both sides, about 2 minutes aside. My preferred method is to put it in a broiler and broil it 1 to 2 minutes per side. Again, that's just going to help start cooking the eggplant. It's also going to pull out some extra moisture in it as well. So we'll do that and come back. Right, so now we have the eggplant. As you can see, it's been broiled on both sides. You'll just notice the texture is a little drier. And we're going to set this aside and work on the red sauce. So you can use any red sauce that you want. Sometimes I'll make a red sauce, like a 3-hour simmer red sauce on the weekends, put it in the freezer, and then you can just pull from that, especially right now where tomatoes are in abundance, and you always, if you have a garden, you always have more tomatoes than you know what to do with. But for today, we're going to be treating this like most people, I think, don't have time to do that. So we're just going to be using a good jar of sauce. Now, one of the things I will say is a lot of the sauces are very runny. And so when you tilt the bottle, you can kind of see the viscosity of it. I go for something that's more on the thick side than on the thin side. And then we're just going to go through like a quick soup it up for a jar of tomato sauce. So in the same pan that we cooked our appetizer, we're adding a little bit more olive oil. We're just heating that up. We want a little bit of a shimmer on it. We're going to take an onion and just do like a medium size dice on it. And when I'm dicing my onion, I tend to cut it one direction, turn it 90 degrees, cut it the other direction. And then you have your dice. And that's more than enough for what we're going to need. We have a nice sized clove of garlic. We're just going to lay it down, do a good smash, and do a mince on that. And then we also have some oregano and basil growing in the garden at McGovern Centennial. And so we have some oregano, some fresh oregano, and to do that we're just going to strip the leaves off the stem, and we can use them whole and just discard the stem. For the basil, we're just going to do a quick chiffonade. So we're going to stack the basil, then roll it kind of like you would a little mini cigar, and then just go along it, and what it's going to create are these little chiffonade ribbons. So our oil looks like it's pretty hot. We're going to add in some of our onion. We're going to add in our garlic. We'll hold off on the herbs. And then I think it's always just, because this is so blended, it's always nice to have a little bit of chunky tomato in the sauce, especially on the top of the sauce. I often like to put the tomatoes. And so What we're going to do with those is, it's just kind of a quick trick if you're cutting cherry tomatoes, which are what I use for this. If you put them in a little saucer that has a recess, put another one on top of it, you've kind of sandwiched them in between. Then if you just take your knife in the middle of it, and you go along, then all of your tomatoes are kind of perfectly cut in half. So it's just, it beats sitting there and cutting one at a time. So we're going to reserve these for a little bit and use them just on the top of our sauce kind of as a garnish. So we're working here. We're just going to get our onions a little bit brown. And then once that's brown, we'll add in the tomato sauce. So we are just kind of browning our onions a bit there. I have a little bit of oil heating up over here. Again, just a little olive oil heating up over there. This is ready. We can go ahead and add in our sauce. And as soon as we add in the sauce, I'm going to turn the heat down a little so it doesn't splatter everywhere. And we're just going to mix that in. And I'm going to add in the herbs that we chopped. And if it's a busy weeknight, that's about the extent of my red sauce, unless I happen to have a prepared one in the freezer. So over here in our little pan, the oil is heated. We're just going to throw in our tomatoes. We're just going to warm those up a bit. And then we'll come right back and we'll start assembling our lasagna. All right, so we're making this in an 8 by 11.5 inch. You could probably do this in 9 by 13. It's not a big deal. We have all of our ingredients. We have our eggplant that's been broiled on both sides. We have our filling, we have our reserved cheese, and we have our sauce that's been warmed up. So we're going to start by just putting a little sauce in the bottom. We're going to spread that. We're going to spread that kind of evenly. And this will just help keep the eggplant from sticking in the very bottom. Now we're going to take our eggplant and we're going to do a layer of eggplant. And again, if you remember to flip the eggplant, you're going to get a more even layer. And it's okay if the eggplant overlaps a little, that's totally fine. All right, so we have that. We're going to go in with a little of our filling. And when you're thinking about this, you can, I'm just mentally doing it, but you can kind of think about dividing your filling in half or thirds. And then you can press it down there. Now, I'm a very hands-on cook, so as long as I've been washing my hands while I'm cooking, I often will do this part by hand. You can also just do it with a spatula. Now we're going to do a layer of sauce. And another layer of eggplant. Again with our filling. And that'll finish out our filling on this layer. And one of the reasons we made our filling first was if you make it second, it really doesn't have enough time to soften up. And spreading it out will help a lot to have it slightly soft. We're going to do a little bit more sauce. We'll do our final layer of eggplant. So this will be, you can see on the side, this will be our third layer of eggplant. And I don't quite have enough eggplant to finish out there. No one's gonna know, it's not a big deal. And then just rake the rest of the sauce here. And what I do right before this is where I'm gonna take the tomatoes that I kind of sauteed a bit. And I'm just gonna mix those into this. It's particularly nice if you have some nice colorful cherry tomatoes. We're gonna take our leftover cheese that we reserved in the very beginning, and we're gonna sprinkle it kind of evenly over the top. So I'm also gonna take a little Parmesan Reggiano and just create a nice layer of it over the top. It's just a slightly more pungent Parmesan. And then we're gonna toss this in a 375-degree oven. It'll cook for about 30-40 minutes, and then we're gonna put it under the broiler. So this is our finished product with the lasagna. And if it doesn't brown up nicely like this, you can always toss it under a broiler quickly, just watch it there, so it doesn't burn too much. And then I always like to just dress it up. We have some extra of our fresh basil. So you can just throw some fresh basil leaf on it, and that will kind of wilt down into the lasagna itself. So if you can't see it, just give you a little better look, and you can kind of see how set it is. If we hadn't done what we did on the eggplant and had used a thinner sauce, you would notice when we did that, there would be a lot of excess moisture coming out of the side. I like to let mine sit for a little bit just to let that eggplant really absorb back in some of the moisture that is present. Serve it up and you're good to go with your entree. All right, so this is something, our dessert is something that you can prepare the night before. So what I thought might be really refreshing is Cantaloupe Sorbet. So we have a lot of melons right now in the garden, and we're growing French types of cantaloupe in particular, and so they're not gonna be the American muskmelon that you're familiar with. So these are both our cantaloupes. You may notice that this one has a date on it, and that's because we often, to sweeten our melons, will pick them and then let them sit for 3, sometimes even 7 days before to sweeten up a little. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is we're just gonna cut our melon in half. You can see we have a nice melon there. I'll take a little bowl. We'll scoop our seeds out. And then you could take it out from the edges, but what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna ball it out straight into the scale, and we are going to keep doing this until we have 2.5 pounds of cantaloupe. All right, so this is the last of our 2.5 pounds of cantaloupe. It's going in the Vitamix. If you don't have a Vitamix, don't freak out. I've only had one for a short period of time, although I will say I do love them. You can do this in a normal blender. I imagine you could probably even do this with an immersion blender or in a food processor. Any of those would work. So, and we're also, the sorbet method we're using today, we're just gonna do a non-ice cream maker freeze because I don't have one of those. Well, I do have an old-fashioned one, but we're not lugging out that in the rock salt today. So we have 2.5 pounds of cantaloupe in here. And then there's a simple syrup you can make is a 1/2 cup of sugar, a 1/4 cup of light corn syrup, and a 1/4 cup of water. Bring it to a boil or a gentle simmer or light boil in a saucepan just till the sugar's nice and dissolved. Take it off, let it cool, and you can use 3/4 cups of that. Every year when I get figs and candy figs, I save the reserved syrup in the bottom of the figs and make a fig syrup. So I think cantaloupe and fig sorbet sounds delicious too, so I'm gonna experiment today, which is part of what cooking is all about, and do 3/4 cups. We're just gonna add that in. And you can scale back on the amount of sugar, of course, but one of the things sugar is going to do is it's going to change the way things freeze, and it's going to give you a slightly softer, slightly smoother sorbet than if you were to just do, say, a fruit ice, right, and omit any sugar at all. So we're going to put the lid on the mixer, and then I will probably dub over some music for you so that you do not go deaf when this thing turns on, but we're going to watch it, and I'm going to start it on low. And then we're going to take it all the way up, because what I want to do is get a lot of air incorporated in this, get it a nice, evenly emulsified mix. And you can kind of watch how much the volume will increase as we increase the speed. Now, if I were doing this in a traditional blender or a food processor, I would use a strainer and I would strain out the puree into this next step. I find that when you're using one of these high power ones, every time I've done it, there's been nothing in the strainer, no solids. So, but just keep in mind, this next step, you should use a strainer if you don't have a high speed blender. So we have a freezer-safe glass dish, just a Pyrex glass dish. And it has been in the freezer, so get it nice and cold. You don't want to be pouring this mixture into a warm dish. And so you also want to work somewhat quickly here and not handle the dish any more than you have to. I have this wrapped in saran wrap. So I'm going to take the mixture. I'm going to pour it in. I'm going to spread one layer of saran wrap, just touch it down over the surface of it, and put this in the freezer to set. All right, so after your puree sets up, what I do is I take it out, let it sit for a couple of minutes, break it up, and I put it back in the blender a second time to whip some air in. Now, you'll find that that will almost solidify it, and you can just scoop it like a soft serve straight out of there and into a chilled dish. No problem. I prefer to do a second set. So I puree it for a second time, frozen, pour it back into a chilled dish, and then do a second set. So when you pull it out, you're just going to let it set up for a little bit. And then go in with your scoop. And you have a pretty great sorbet. So here we have the end of our dinner. It's a little sorbet. This is just a plain cantaloupe. There's no fig syrup in this one. I made this last night. You could very easily take a little mint honey and drizzle it on the glass or over the sorbet if you wanted to add a little sweetness, another flavor profile. But there's nothing wrong with it just as cantaloupe. And I think that's just the kind of perfect way to end a dinner. There's not too much, it's just a little bit of sweetness, utilizing something from the garden. And we hope you've enjoyed this video and that it's inspired you to utilize things that you're growing in your garden, or perhaps you're getting these things from a farmer's market and supporting local produce. If you haven't visited us in McGovern Centennial Gardens, please come out and visit the gardens. If you don't follow our page, follow the McGovern Centennial Garden in Herman Park page. Also Harris County Master Gardeners and Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, Harris County Horticulture. All great ways to stay in touch with what's going on in the world of nature in the Houston area. So thanks for joining.